afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. Today we are going to begin with a new series on sociology of religion. And in this series we are going to talk about the sociological approach to understanding religion. So religion is kind of a very important, not only in terms of a set of beliefs and practices that people do, but it becomes more important when we look into a contemporary society, in society in which we are living, because religion in terms of personal beliefs, religion in terms of public beliefs, religion when it kind of seen in relations to state, how does state protects religious beliefs and ideas, what is the relation between religion and economy. So we are going to kind of have a very holistic understanding of the institution of religion, and in this series we are going to focus more on the sociological thinking theories which have tried to comprehend religion or make it kind of very understandable by people. What is religion? And in that context, we'll see in the lecture how we need to differentiate between a theological understanding of religion and a sociological understanding of religion. So it kind of a very evolutionary and a historical way in which social scientists have tried to look into religion from different perspectives, and all of them have tried to kind of give us a very comprehensive understanding of religion. So when we try to talk about sociology of religion, then we are trying to focus that what is so specific of the subject religion in the study of social science, specifically in sociology. And in that context, we know that religion can be understood at a set of beliefs and modes of action. So beliefs is kind of set of ideas which is associated, and then we have rites, that is RITES, which is a mode of action. So depending on the belief that an individual has or a group has, the rituals, rites are associated. So we all individual, as member of a society or a group, everyone has a belief system, which is kind of also a way in which we see the world. So what is basically religion? Religion kind of could be defined in a very simple language as a way of looking at society. And in that context, when we talk about, say, kind of a individual or a deity, what are we trying to do? We are trying to follow the path set by these individuals, and that is why it kind of be defined as a particular belief in the way in which individuals are going to live their life. And it is a social institution that we are aware of. It also helps us do what? It helps us pattern social action. That is, how do we interact with the other individual depends on a belief system, and therefore it could also lead to a kind of a structuring of the society. So there are certain practices that people develop to answer certain questions about the existence of society or to a larger context, existence of life itself. So all questions of birth, death, where we look into a particular way of kind of achieving salvation or achieving moksha, we get an answer to these questions when we kind of refer to religion. And it's not something that is kind of considered as evolved all over a night, or it is something which is part of the present society, but it has always been there since individual life started, or since the beginning of the society. What has changed is how we kind of look at the belief system and how we transform the mode of action. So maybe from a kind of, say, when we'll see in the lecture, when we talk about secularization or where we talk about secularism, one mode of understanding secularization was the advent of modernity, where thinking became rational. People started giving us explanation to every action. So it was kind of argued that we are moving from a supernatural phase to a scientific stage, and that implied that there is a diminishing importance of religion. But then what is also kind of looked into it, that when modernity comes in and everything is governed around rationality, scientific thinking, bureaucracy, what happens is that therefore religion kinds of gets separated from the state and becomes relegated to the private sphere. So secularization does not in a kind of says that there is a diminishing importance of religion, but it's only the way in which it is practiced has transformed. So that is why we can say that it is an organized structure. And when we talk about religion, and we'll be referring to a number of sociologists and philosophers, we also look into the fact that it helps us to learn, socialize about the norms and values of society. So when we are talking about religion, it's kind of a very wide gamut of things that can come under it. But we are in this series, I'm going to focus or concentrate only on the sociological understanding of religion. And to understand a sociological approach to religion, what comes into mind is to understand the method. Because religion can be understood by a historian, it could be understood by politicians, also by theologists. So how do we differentiate between a sociological understanding and the others? And for that we'll see that when we look into sociology, a sociological approach, how do we understand it's a sociological approach? We'll try to see that it will then study religion from the point of method, in the sense that it's going to focus on how religion is going to help us make sense of the society, how religion is going to help us give a perspective of society in which we are living. So what is the method which anthropologists and sociologists have used? And here we see that in the kind of sociology itself emerging as a discipline, the comparative method, which was kind of comparing to society and arriving at certain kind of an understanding, was very important. And in that there was a lot of talk about objectivity and neutrality, which we will be debating in the course of the lecture, whether objective understanding of religion is possible or not. So when we look into the method, we see why religion is a subject of study. And this is kind of discussed by Andre Bethe in his work on religion as a subject in sociology. And here we see that we need to understand religion as a subject, because it's kind of important. It is important because it helps us to understand the relations between two individuals will depend on the perspective or a certain set of ideas that they have. And we are studying economy, we are trying to study the market, we are studying the state. So if we are trying to understand these institutions, religion becomes significant. So in sociology, when we look into religion, it has been kind of researched, studied and analyzed by different sociologists and thinkers. There are different ways in which religion has been understood. And then first way that we kind of look into it is to understand the materialistic interpretation. And here the materialistic interpretation comes in from Karl Marx. For Karl Marx, religion was the opium of the masses, and that is, it kind of gave them way out of the suffering, of everyday suffering. So if we look into Marx theory, it was a theory of the relations that was evolving from the modes of production. And he basically looked into the two classes, those who have ownership of property and those who are denied. So those who are denied, whose labors is appropriated, who are not being able to earn enough to survive the subsistence, they are kind of left on to kind of get on with religion, which gives them some hope of things changing in future. So that is how we try to understand materialistic understanding. Then we also kind of understand that there is a functionalist interpretation of religion. When we talk about functionalist, then we are trying to talk about how religion as an institution performs certain positive functions. And later on it also kind of comes in terms of where we will be looking into some of the conflicts, some of the violence that arises because of the belief system clashing between two communities, or when it kind of messes with politics and there is a communalism. So we basically, when we look into sociology, we are not kind of identifying any one singular method or approach to study, but there are multiple ways. There are different ways in which different scholars have conceptualized religion, and most of them, you know, in religion or for in that sense, have done kind of large field scale study, ethnographic study, and arrived at their understanding. So some of the prominent sociologists which we should kind of may understand if we were to make sense of sociology of religion is obviously the names like Max Weber, who studied the relation between economy and society, Emile Durkheim, who gave us an understanding of the entire notion of the collective consciousness, where religion becomes a binding factor. It kind of creates an organic solidarity among people. Then we also have this anthropologists like Ratley Brown, Bronislaw Malinowski, Evans Pritchard, Levi Strauss, and these are some of the prominent anthropologists and sociologists who have helped us to understand religion. When we look into anthropology, much of the study by anthropologists has been to understand the relation between three, that is magic, religion and science. And also an important part of it is to understand myth. Now if we look into the initial, say the classical understanding in anthropology, we see that magic, religion and science have been put on an evolutionary plane, and many anthropologists have given us the understanding that as society progresses, as society moves towards the more in terms of progress, technology, scientific understanding, there is a shift from magic to religion to science. But then there is a critique to this, and there are anthropologists, say for instance Malinowski, who would argue that all the three can coexist at the same time, and there is nothing kind of one giving way to the other. So when we look into a sociological understanding of religion, what comes very important is to understand how sociologists would differ from theological understanding, because still the discipline of sociology kind of comes in and we start having theories and understanding of religion. There were certain ways in which religion was understood, and in that sense we know that we kind of have different ways of studying religion. So in sociology and anthropology we can kind of put into these into brackets like evolutionarist approach, functionalist approach, structuralist approach, and therefore we kind of also try to understand that there are certain common element which makes up the subject matter. So whether you are studying from a functionalist perspective or from a structuralist perspective, what is the subject of study? And the subject of study for a sociologist or anthropologist is the set of ideas, is the set modes of action which is around it, and how these ideas and action structures relations or help us to kind of function as a holistic whole. So sociology of religion is old and kind of also kind of considered as a diverse branch of study. But before sociology, as I already said, we already have a theological study, and theology is the oldest branch which studied religion. Now, theological study had occupied a lot of importance in the Judaic and Islamic intellectual tradition, because much of the study of religion was coming from these learned scholars who have interpreted religious texts, scripts, and they have kind of became a kind of custodian of this knowledge. So they were in a sense of trying to use a body of knowledge to kind of put forward the argument that one particular branch of ideas and actions are better or is more truthful compared to the other. The sociologists are not doing that. They are not trying to do an evaluation of whether one religion is better than the other or which is truth. They are not searching truth. What is a sociologist doing is helping us to understand how religion helps us to understand social reality, and second, how religion helps us to structure social reality. So when we look into the approaches, So we have this theological approach, which is kind of much before sociology of religion comes in, and it was all more or less kind of a combination of theology plus psychology, which was put into the philosophy of religion, and then they were kind of going into more into the past, into the history of religion, how a particular religion emerged, who were the followers, kind of giving us a historical understanding. And then we have sociology and anthropologists. Now, in the initial, in social sciences, they were kind of considered as different. Sociology studying their own society, anthropology studying the other society. But over a period of time, this difference is kind of not applicable, and we know that the sociology and anthropologists are considered as more or less similar, especially when we look into the study of religion. Whether we can consider Radcliffe Brown's study of as sociological or anthropologist kind of gets a little complicated. So different approach. They are kind of, say, when we look into Emile Durkheim, he's kind of considered as a sociologist. He's using a functionalist approach. Malinowski is also considered as an anthropologist, is also using a functionalist approach. But we cannot follow these divides and boundaries. These are not rigid boundaries. This is kind of only helping us to understand the fact that religion as an institution, as a social institution, has been comprehended or understood by thinkers from different perspectives. So the different approaches can be arranged on a continuum, because if we were to understand today the way in which, say, we were to understand what set of religious ideas are important, how religious idea has kind of become very significant in terms of political functioning. Obviously, we have to go back to the past and look what was the function or how religion was understood. What was the relation between religion and state in the pre-modern time? Only then we will be able to understand the present. So it is not necessarily to make this distinction. There is nothing kind of what is normative, which is kind of one being normative and the other being empirical. And neither, when we look into a sociological approach of religion, a sociologist is not making any judgment, is not kind of doing any kind of evaluation. Because we need to keep in mind that as sociologists, our task is not to discover truth. Our task is not to kind of put forward a normative pattern. But what we are trying to do the other way around, that we can, through research, through data, kind of arrive that this belief, this mode of action is kind of appears or kind of is legitimized by society as normative. So if we were to compare theology and sociology, we need to see what is the difference, because both are studying religion. Theology is also study of religion. Sociology is also trying to make an effort to study religion. So the first distinction is, as I have already said, is that theology is trying to discover the truth and concerned with rectitude in religious beliefs and practices. So you are going to just kind of first discover a truth, and through a certain kind of evidence, kind of consider one branch or one belief system as more important than the other. So that is the task of a theologian. Sociology, we are kind of only observing. We are observing society with a certain kind of a critical mind. We are tending to describe reality as it is practiced. We are not going to kind of intervene or kind of put in our perspective. Just describe reality as it is and explain the manner in which religious beliefs and practices operate. And that is why the comparative method becomes very significant, because we are trying to observe religious beliefs and practices, and maybe two or more society will differ. So we need to compare and see how we have arrived at a multidimensional understanding of religion. The second difference is the study of religion is guided by religious ways, and if kind of it could be a vested interest, because a theologian would be studying his or her own belief system, her own religious practices. So they would be already a mindset or a certain understanding which will get interpreted or colored when the analysis is being done. In sociology, we go to the field without any kind of an prior assumption or prior understanding. We do not kind of color the understanding or the description of reality with our own beliefs and substance. We are just going to do it as a way of doing. So we are not going to kind of attach any value. We are not doing any value assessment, or we are not even evaluating whether this practice is better than the other. We are only giving a description based on the observation of the reality as it is. And the third difference is that theology is more concerned with inner meanings of belief and practices. So it is kind of more coming in from the branch of philosophy. So more at an abstract level, nothing which can be empirically explained, something which kind of, only can be understood at a philosophical level. That is kind of say, you do not have any concrete outcome of the action which is being studied. In sociology, it is not an abstract. It's not something which is happening at an inner level, but what is empirically evident, that is the outcome of the beliefs and practices of an individual or society. The fourth difference is, in theology, attention is paid to features of particular religion, and the goal is to prove one's religion. So since it is kind of most of the time a theologian would be an expert or a kind of a learned person from that community who is making that effort to study. Therefore, his kind of goal is to prove that the religion that he practices is kind of the most kind of the truth, is going to take out the truth, and therefore into doing that, to prove that one is more speaking about truth than the other, you then start kind of demeaning the other practices. So that kind of has a negative aspect. In sociology, we, as I already said, we use comparative method, and when we say comparative, implies that we are studying a plurality of ideas and practices, and in that context, all the religions are placed on one context. They are not ranked into a hierarchy, and therefore it becomes kind of all religions are kind of seen from an egalitarian perspective. The last difference is, then when we look into theological study, they are studying only one particular religion, whereas sociologists are looking at the reality or in terms of interconnections. We are looking into the relation between religion and economy, religion and state, and so on and so forth. So we are kind of giving us more holistic. So what is the most important feature of sociological approach? Number one, as I already said, extensive use of comparative method. Number two, the investigation of religious belief practices in institution in relation to other aspects and culture. So it is not only kind of excluding or abstracting religion from the other, but we are seeing the interconnection, and that is why, because we are trying to understand reality, social reality, and for that we need to see the relation between all the dimensions rather than just focusing on one aspect. And as I've already said, that we have the comparative method has been used by Radcliffe Brown, by Durkheim, by almost all the classical anthropologists and sociologists have used this. And the comparative method was kind of also enabling us to kind of arrive at certain generalization, and they kind of help us to you can look into how it helps us to have a more holistic understanding, and it relies on observation, description, and generalization. So when we look into the sociology of religion, and this will do in larger debate, more time into it, in terms of religion as a social fact, and that is Durkheim's understanding, and he will kind of help us understand how you need to look at religion in terms of a functionalist perspective. And using Durkheim, Srinivas studied the course of religion and social structure in the course of Mysore, and he also uses a functionalist perspective in trying to understand that how religion helps to keep the society as a binded institution. And in that, he will be kind of more reflecting on Weber's Verstehen or subjective understanding. So on one side we have objective neutrality and the other we have subjectivity. So the question is that when we are studying religion, is objectivity possible or value neutrality possible? And therefore it kind of becomes a little difficult, and Weber's Verstehen becomes more important. So this is how we kind of in lecture we are trying to just introduce the sociology of religion. In the following lecture, each lecture will take up one of the ideas or one of the thinkers. So we will be discussing, say, Durkheim, we'll be discussing Weber, we'll be discussing M.N. Srinivas, and in that, through the series, we will be able to understand how sociologists have contributed in terms of doing a comprehensive and holistic understanding of religion. With this, I come to an end of lecture. Thank you.